Hi, everyone. This is Stephanie Jaco, CSEP, back again for another episode of Events Connect. Thank you for everyone out there who is joining us again this episode. I want to thank everybody who joined us last time for our conversations, and as well those of you who were able to join us for office hours. Last month's conversations were really great, and we got some really wonderful insights about our topics of conversation. And we're very excited to bring you more content and more conversations and keep the ideas flowing. So we are really excited to have this next guest with us. But before we get to that, I do want to just fully disclose that due to scheduling, as I'm sure all of you out there in the events industry can understand, schedules are sometimes difficult to work around. So we have had to pre-record this particular episode. Unfortunately, our guest this week has had some scheduling that with work, so we are working around his schedule to be able to bring you the same conversations and content. So this is pre-recorded, but we do intend to continue with our live sessions next month. So without further ado, we do want to get into the content and we want to get into our conversations. So for this episode, our guest is the Board of Directors and Events Chair for the LGBT MPA. He is also the president of the Massachusetts Live Events Coalition and a great industry leader and advocate. And of course, my dear friend, Thomas Whelan. So if we'll all give him a big round of applause and bring him on with us. Hi, Thomas.
Hi. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have you on this episode with me. I know that I have put you through so many of these different kinds of conversations. And because of that, I figure it's probably a conversation that many others will like to have or like to hear. And I think it's an important conversation to have is the perception versus intention conversation and how we speak to each other and how we think about speaking to each other and what that means. So before we get into that conversation, I would love for you to give us a little bit of background on you and your experience with LGBT MPA and the LEC.
Amazing. Well, thank you for having me. It is a very important conversation, one that I bring up a lot and we talk about a lot. So the LGBT MPA, for those of you who do not know, which I hope all of you know, is a place for meeting professionals who are both LGBT plus and are allies to create a safe networking space, physical space at industry conferences, as well as virtual meetups and things like that for LGBT plus meeting planners, suppliers, vendors. I hate doing that, but we all know the shtick for anyone who's involved in some capacity in meetings and events, very specifically, traditionally corporate meetings and events. It's also a really great resource for those of you who are planning events to look at different destinations. They are a part of the LGBT MPA, and they will, quite frankly, put out their inclusion plans of how to make your LGBT plus attendees feel safe and respected and, want you to do business there. So for them, I joined the board. I think I'm on my second year now. I was in Cincinnati at a NACE event where they had one of their receptions, and I joined on the spot. There's two forms of membership. One is complimentary. It's just for everyday individuals. And then there, of course, is business membership and sponsorship opportunities for like our events. We're doing 8 events this year, which is mind-blowing.
That's a lot.
We just had a really, really great event at PCMA in Las Vegas. And then in a few weeks at Business Events Industry Week at National Gaylord, right outside of Washington, D.C., will also be a part of the reception there. You can find us at IMEX, NACE again, both of the connects, both Detroit and Puerto Rico, ASAE. We're out there. We're everywhere. And if you're ever at one of those events and you want a safe space or just a place to be around LGBT plus people and allies. It's a really great time.
Yeah.
And then the Live Events Coalition, I am the fortunate president of the Massachusetts chapter, and we advocate for financial resources, mental health resources, training programs, legislation advocacy for live events professionals in Massachusetts, and as well nationwide legislation. If you're not familiar with LEC, or like your state or local chapter, we're doing some great things. If you aren't even from Massachusetts, we provide a lot of great mental health resources. I know that we are going to be talking about soon one coming up about imposter syndrome in the live events industry, which we're advocating for McLean Hospital, which is under the Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare system in Massachusetts. And we did one during the real shutdown, the core of the shutdown, about being a live events professional who, I joke I get my serotonin at events. Like that's where I find my joy, my happy place is like in a room full of 6,000 strangers. Yeah. And it was really, really amazing. And what's really great about it is if you just like register for these sessions, you can watch it on your own time after it's broadcast live. That's my plug for everyone to check on their mental health and the mental health of their friends. And for those of us, myself included, as you know, who have severe imposter syndrome.
I'm right there with you. And I know that you're a huge advocate for mental and self-care. And you are very good at that in checking in with those of us in your circle and doing wellness checks. I'm very well aware of your wellness checks, and they're very appreciated. So
yes, you will get a wellness check text from me.
That's true. That is very true. So all of these things that you are part of and working with and volunteering for lead into this conversation really well, because you are kind of at the center of all things people in those capacities, and how we relate to each other in our industry and how we take care of each other in our industry. And so that kind of then carries on into our conversation of not only are we taking care of ourselves in our industry, but also our attendees and so on and so forth. So I think that's a great place to jump into our topic this week, which is this idea of perception versus intention. So what I want to ask you is, I know I've seen this and I've been at fault of this at times and not realized it. So in your perspective and what you're seeing, what is the awareness or language issue? What is the biggest thing that you've seen with language and awareness and surrounding that in the current state of things?
Yeah. So I think there's like two things to just like kind of touch on first. One, I will definitely be sharing my experiences, but I think it's important to acknowledge where my experiences come from. Mm-hmm. So I am a queer, white, male presenting, pronouns he, him. Although I face a lot of stigmas and stereotypes, those stigmas and stereotypes go across many marginalized people. And I want to just put out there that my experiences are not the experiences of everyone. And unfortunately, like a lot of people have far worse experiences. So I just want to put that out there. I don't speak for everyone. I can only speak for myself. However, the other caveat is anyone who's like listening is like, we all have been in this situation and everyone needs to take a sigh of relief because we've all said the wrong thing. And whether we've said the wrong thing in relation to affecting someone or impacting someone, or whether we've just said the wrong thing, like during a contract or a negotiation, you're like, oh my God, I just quoted someone wrong. Right. I'm going to make half my day rate. Like everyone just take a deep breath and realize that like we all go through this. But a part of this kind of not reckoning, but acknowledgement is the first step in any in realizing any issues, really accepting the issue. And the issue really is like the intent versus impact, that what you intend can impact someone so differently. And I read this blog article by onlyblackgirl.com. She has a blog post where she talks about intent impact a lot from her perspective. And she said something that was like really stuck out, and I looked it up because I wanted to, if anyone wants to read it, it's, if I accidentally punch you in the face, did I punch you in the face? And that's really what it is. We've all accidentally hit. Most people I know have accidentally hit someone. Yesterday, someone accidentally dropped a 40-pound box of coffee on my head. Did I still get hit with a box of coffee? Yes. But, I can acknowledge what that situation is. So the first step is just everyone acknowledge that sometimes we say things that come out from, or sometimes we say things without thinking about it, or sometimes we say things without doing any research or understanding. And when that happens, I think what's really core to this is if your intentions are never malicious and you always come from a place of respect in certain dialogues, I think it would surprise people how impactful that could be. When we talk about like pronoun use, like pronoun usage, like I make sure I really wish some of the event technology software just would keep my name how it is, but every meeting I have to go in and make sure I change it. But why am I telling you that my pronouns are he, him, his? Someone will just of course, that's Thomas. Of course I'd call him he, him. And I would appreciate you refer to me as whatever I would like to be referred to. However, there's a deeper meaning to it. And it's people or persons or folks who, do not use the traditional conforming pronouns. They see that I'm acknowledging their presence and their importance. So my intent in putting my pronouns out there is never, so you get it right. It is that I'm impacting the people who need to know that I am there. I am a safe place. A lot of times I'm a resource. I tell some of my friends who really battle with they, them pronouns that use them on me, because I know it can get a little bejangled. It can get, and I know that you want to do it right. And the time to get it right for them is never the time they need to do it in the moment.
Right. Yeah.
So just lock it in with me. I will answer to anything. I just love attention. So my pronouns could be literally any word, because I'm just gonna answer. You can say Stephanie, and I'm gonna go yes. So not to make light of the situation, but that is someone thinking about their intent and impact, and thinking about I want to do it right. How can I do it right? Yeah.
Things are falling off my desk. It's fine. The joys of working from home. Yeah, I think that's a really a great first step to just understanding, none of us are going to be perfect at this the first time around. And it's like a muscle. If you don't exercise it, it's never going to get better. You're never going to get stronger at it. So actually having that forethought to say, I'm intending to do this right, but I need to practice before it will become a rote situation and just become part of our regular language. So I think that's a really smart point to make, is that it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be perfect out of the gate for anyone. So I think that's really, really a great point to
and no one is going to master this.
Right.
No one is going to master their impact on others. And I think it's also really important. I can talk about it till the so what is that saying? The cows come home. Because
if there are cows in my home, there's something very wrong.
Yes. I can talk about it, and I think one of the important things is to talk with your friends about it. This conversation is almost like a natural conversation of what we. I literally text you and say, I don't think you meant to say that word.
It's true. I have text messages from you.
And it's never about things that are bad. It's about words. I'm I don't think someone like you're so this is the English language. This is regimented. someone like me, I'm like, periods are optional. And I don't know what a comma is, but thank you for telling me to take a breath, but you're not the boss of me. You know what I mean? Like, so I think it's important, like, everyone's going to make mistakes and no one's going to be perfect at this. And like, as long as you're willing to just listen and be like, you know what, maybe I could figure out how to say things differently or do things differently. You know, we're going to talk about stigmas and stuff like that. And like, I think people really aren't thinking about what it is that is impactful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was thinking about this before I came on. I was like, you know, I think people are so afraid to be racist, homophobic, transphobic, or sexist. Everyone is afraid of it.
Yeah.
But in my head, as like a queer person, and in regards to homophobia, I operate under the full like guise that no one wants to be a public homophobe. It's not cool. It's not cool to be home. Did a younger version of myself think I'd ever say it's not cool to be homophobic? No. But like we have transitioned into a day and age, especially with like the generation below us and probably the generation below us, like where, you know, it isn't a thing. It just isn't a thing. It's unheard of to be openly homophobic, as opposed to, you know, when I was growing up, or when my elders and ancestors, like my queer ancestors, I call them, the people who like literally fought on the street, like when they were here, where it was normal to not, it wasn't normal to not be.
Sure.
You know?
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah. Sorry.
It's fair. I mean, the conversations, the way we're coming at these conversations is coming from a different place than it would have 20 years ago, when you and I were just getting into the industry and careers at large and all of that. So I think where we are today and having this conversation is very different than it could have been, you know, even 5 years ago. So I think it's an evolving conversation as perceptions of society change as well. But I think in having these conversations, it helps us get to the point of, it's not cool to be publicly any derogatory term necessarily. So to that end, I think that brings me to another question of like, why is it so important? Why is this conversation of intention versus perception so important to those of us in the events and hospitality industry and our event professional planners and all of that? Why is this a prevalent conversation right now?
So I think there's two ways. One, and you know, I always go the personal and then the business. Mm-hmm. If you're a business owner, you're a solo entrepreneur, if you have a number of employees or team members, you know, I have roughly about 500 team members on my team. I have a very large team. Mm-hmm. So I can say something at a very wide net and catch someone and it not being impactful in the right way.
Sure.
And I also acknowledge that I have a platform. I go and speak, and I represent these amazing organizations. So there's a platform there as well, where if I am not saying something intentfully, like, I could impact my brand, the places I represent, the boards I sit on, my company as a whole. And then from the business angle, you can lose business. Let's be very direct about it. Like, you can unintentionally do something and impact everyone. You know, you can, like, when I talk about being LGBT in meetings and events, I always ask planners when they're, you know, choosing their destinations, did you look up what it is like to be a queer person of color, or any marginalized person in this location? Mm-hmm. Because I see multiple member-based associations hosting events in areas where it can be illegal. You can be detained for being LGBT. You can get serious harm done to you by just being LGBT plus on the street.
Mm-hmm.
Just living authentically, walking to your hotel from the conference center. And there it's like, where is the intention?
Right.
Because the impact is, I'm not coming to your event.
Sure. Yeah.
Just because there wasn't a consideration for my safety. And I press upon planners, especially corporate planners or conference planners, like, are you doing that work? Because they're not.
Mm-hmm.
They are 100%. A large number of them are not. And what I've learned from being on like the LGBT MPA board is there are so many destinations that are putting this information in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
They're willing to show you the work and do the work and say, like, this is a safe space for any and all of your attendees. Mm-hmm. This is how we do this. This is how we do that. Like, you know, for people with different abilities, you know, this is how we set up our queuing system. You know, people will be able to get through on a motorized device. Like, there's thought in it, and they're trying to be impactful of how they can open the doors to everyone. And then conference planners are like, okay, cool. What is the venue rental? What is, you know, like, that's great. We're just trying to get down to the dollars. And sometimes, you know, you risk it all. Like, I remember years ago, what was it? Like the NCAA removing itself from Georgia because of some, you know, I would say human rights issues. Like, that's a big deal, you know, like willing to just leave. And if you're not being intentful and impactful, you're also going to be, if you're not being intentful in the right way, your impact is going to be your business.
Yeah. So to that end too, I said, you know, you're talking about planners. A lot of them aren't doing the research and the work to actually understand that portion. But from my perspective and in what I do, a lot of times it's not really the final decision of where a conference is not necessarily up to me, or in any particular decision, that's part of the conversation with the client. So would you then say it's our responsibility as the planner, as the events professional, to educate our clients on why certain places?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's our responsibility as human beings to ask the question. You know, do you know who Ellen Pompeo is?
I do. Yeah.
She's an actress on Grey's Anatomy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And she has there's this really amazing video of her where she talks about it's her responsibility as a white person when she walks on set to ask where the color is. Mm. And that was really impactful to me because it's my responsibility when I walk into any room to make sure the room looks like the world I want to live in. And the world I want to live in is really diverse. It's diverse in thought. It's diverse in education. It's diverse in color, culture. It's just diverse. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I mean it in so many ways. Like, because a room can, like, really on the outside look very one way, but when you start meeting people and interacting with them, you realize the multiple layers, the intersectional, you know, experiences people have that make it a better event. I'm sure if you do a scan of the room of the best events you've ever been to, it's a truly diverse and equitable stakeholder table. Mm-hmm. You know? And then also, like, being a queer person, being LGBT, like, I always think it's funny that when you think of a party planner or a wedding planner and you think of how their stereotype are shown on television, it is an effeminate gay man. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. And when you really get into the industry, it really is not.
No.
You know, and it really is not. You know, I joke around that, like, you know, the average planner I see is a, like, 35-year-old white girl, white woman, white female. And then you go to panels, or then you go meet the business owners, and they are cis hetero white men who are making the most money. But like the stereotype is this like effeminate gay man who like, you know, is all huff and a puff. And when you actually go into the industry and you see like it isn't there. We're there as an effeminate queer person, like we're there, but like I'm not designing your room. Right. You know, which I also think is really funny for just like intent is when I'm working an event, I am 90% more likely to be asked about pillows than a P&L.
That's an unfortunate reality.
Yeah, you know, and I love pillows. Anyone knows me, I love a pillow. I have them all over my house. And I love design but what I am the best at is taking a designer's vision and making it operate in physical spaces, specifically with food and beverage, and that's where I come from. But if I'm on a walkthrough with stakeholders, 80% of the time I'm asked if I'm a designer. Mm-hmm. Are you the designer? Are you the plant? Are you the florist?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we all know why.
True.
It's the quiet part. It's the quiet part. We all know why. And I'm just happy to be in the room. But it's definitely like you don't realize the intention there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that brings me to my next question for you. And actually, it's a great segue is you touched on it just slightly a little bit, but the impact of what a stereotype or a stigma or an assumption is, and what does that look like? And I mean, coming from your perspective as an LGBT plus member of that community, but also for a lot of marginalized communities in the U.S. specifically, because that's where you and I are based and have the most experience in. But I would rather, without trying to assume things, but I would think it likely that this is not just an a U.S. American problem. But yeah,
America's real good at it.
We have this problem, and I see it from my perspective to people that I am working with, that I'm friends with, that I am around. I'm sure if I really got into it, I could think of things that I have been stigmatized for. I am coming from the perspective of a middle America white cis woman. So there's a lot fewer things that I am stigmatized for than many of the people that I'm around every day. But I think I would love to get your positioning and your thoughts on where that lies and what really truly is a stigma or a stereotype in where we are.
Stigma, to me, in my opinion, stigmas and stereotypes are just form of power control.
Interesting.
Because all we're doing, you know, is labeling someone or assuming what their worth is in a conversation or what their worth is at an event. Let's look at events. Like, you know, as an effeminate gay man, queer man, I am a designer. I can make it pretty. As a woman, you're probably there to help, not run the tech board. Will you go get my coffee? You know, in the office space, I heard this really interesting fact. It was on Harvard Business Review, has like a podcast. It's under like one of their training programs, and it was talking about work experiences for Black women. And they had this really interesting statistic that has always stuck out to me. And it's 85%, and if the numbers are off, I'm not quoting it from the thing, but it's roughly like 85% of like the like home work, like work that you would do at home but in the office, is done by a woman of color in the office.
Interesting.
Like, you know, I've never worked in these environments, but like the person who cleans out the fridge once a week. I think these were references directly made, like the person organizing the catering or doing those kind of like tasks that are like not a part of your job, but are like in the environment of an office space like that. And that really like not perplexing. I was like, what? That's wild. And then I started unpacking my experiences in similar situations. And I was like, holy crap. How did I not even notice this? And I'm currently in like more of like an office environment, and it's the same thing to be true. So I not force myself, I make sure that I'm doing my part. I might not drink the brewed coffee, but I'm not going to let one person brew the coffee every morning, or I'm not going to have one person go through the fridge, because then that's just falling into this like stigma or stereotype that a woman of color has to do this.
Yeah.
And so just like, to me, it's like, well, what else? It is that when you see me at an event, are you going to ask me about the design, or are you going to ask me about the operations of it, the timelines, where everything is going? Are you going to, I'm better at doing an event P&L in 5 minutes than I am at figuring out like a vignette of couches. It's just, I'll figure out that couch vignette and it's going to look amazing. I would much rather figure out the flow through of an event and figure out profitability and, where we're at. But is it offensive when someone asks me a design question? No. Right? No.
I guess that's my question.
It depends. If I think that they're asking me because they think that because they've seen my events, that's really the gauge. Like if you're a random person, I'm like, something's gone awry. But if you're someone who's worked with me multiple times and like I also like have a vision and I like to stick to my brand, then that makes sense. And I have to internalize and compartmentalize where that intent is and where their impact is. And is this really a bad thing? Is this me being overreactive? Maybe it is because I put my 2 cents in whenever I can. Or maybe it is because they saw the wedding planner or my, and they were like, oh, gay. What pretty.
Sure. And I think in my, A through Z plans, A through Z brain, I'm also thinking to myself, if it's a scenario where, you're in what you do, you set up and you put together these beautiful F&B scapes. You really do. And does that, for someone who doesn't know you and is just walking through and asking about something, if you happen to be seen helping that operation happen and they say something to you about being a designer, does how and where they see you and the circumstance that things are said in play into your internalization and perception of what has just been asked of you?
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, everyone responds differently and tries to break down, like, is this like affecting me? And my biggest thing is I don't want to be excluded from the conversations that I need to be in. So is this stigma stereotype exclusionary? It's a big thing. Like, I don't want to then, when I talk about the business end or the operations, for someone to go like, oh, but you're the designer. But that's also me. That's my issue. But I need to, once it happens, I have to really start thinking about, like, where did this come from? Is this an opportunity for me to say, hey, I'm actually not who you need for this. Let me get them. Or is this a moment where I can just be like, oh yeah, I think you should do this. But I wonder, in regards to LGBT people and specifically the experiences I have as a gay queer man, like, how often does this happen? How often does it happen? And I know how often it happens to me, so I can only assume how often it's happening to other people.
Sure.
But now that I talk about it,
Mm-hmm.
someone may listen to this and say the next time they're in a room, hey, I'm sorry, I have a design question. Like, would you, like, are you on the design team or something like that? It's the same way that, like, I consciously have to unpack and work on, like, my intention and my delivery. I'm a very direct person.
Mm.
You
direct? Never.
Never. I always want, and people, like, people think I'm a bitch. And when you get to know me, it's like secretly the furthest thing from the truth.
Right.
But I also think, like, if my voice didn't sound like this, and I said the exact same thing in, like, a bass or a baritone, would it be perceived as that?
Interesting.
There's no way to know.
Yeah. I think that leads into another question of mine. I think that intention is from if I'm speaking to you, my intention is from my side of the conversation.
Yes.
Your perception is from your side of the conversation. And if my intention is genuine and sincere, how do I tell what your perception is going to be? And I don't know that there's an answer.
I mean, I think if you think about it, there are ways. The things I'm mentioning are very, like, oddly niche, probably. They're my hangups of where I don't like to be perceived, because, like, I am, actively always considering, like, my role and where I belong, and that has a lot of things to do with my experiences. Like, I talk about education a lot. People, there's this weird value on education, and I don't value education. I appreciate it, but I don't think that determines your worth as someone on a team.
And by education, you mean formalized higher education?
Yes. I mean, there are certain things, like, if you're a tradesperson or you're in a skilled, labor position, like, obviously that's different. Like, that's training, and to mine, that's on, like, training for job skills. But, like, what I think is, like, I don't think you need a high school diploma to throw a great event.
Yeah.
I don't. And I would argue to anyone, I don't think that, like, you need to have a very strong understanding of the industry, and you need to have a very strong understanding of business just so you're successful, and, like, all of that. But all of that are things you pick up. I've learned everything in my life from other people and from the mistakes I've made.
Yeah.
But when we talk about the importance of education, how are you impacting the people around the table who don't have that, but have the same skill set? And most often, the people who don't have it, it's because they came from a place of access and opportunity where they weren't going to have it.
It wasn't necessarily a choice.
I think personally, I think if you will walk up to someone and say, you can do that, you have the opportunity to do this and this. One of these is, gonna basically validate you and work for an obscene amount of money. And, like, you'll be validated and people won't question things. And the other one is you're going to work really hard and probably get to the same place, but you'll be questioned a lot. What are you going to choose? I don't know. Like,
it would seem that one is the path of
least resistance.
Least resistance, yes.
Yeah. So, like, when I hire people, I always ask for education to be redacted. I ask for education to be redacted, neighborhood to be redacted, and then any gender markers. That's just how I operate, to try to come in with the least biases that we all have, and those things. And some people have a real issue with that. Some people have a real issue with it. But my team is really incredible because they are so diverse from what they come in. And like, I didn't consider, whether they sat in a classroom for 4 years or whether they got their training slinging drinks at a dirty bar.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, unclean, like an unclean bar where you realize like health and sanitation is really important. You learn it the hard way. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Instead of sitting for a serve safe class, which is also very important. So like, people should get serve safe certified. That's on the job. But like the same with like in the back of house, like the tech world, like whether you have this like, like what the Emerson, what are the Ithaca, all the big theater schools, whether you went through that back of house program or you like 1099'd and then joined IATSE and you worked with, stagehands or tech producers and like you got your training that way. Like, I don't think, and from conversations I've heard from other people, like, I don't know if there's value. And that's not my world. But like, when imagine sitting at a table and everyone's talking about like, oh, when I went to college and I went to this, or in high school or this, like how that impacts other people. And so I'm not telling people not to talk about it, but like a normal conversation can negatively impact people. Just a very real conversation. If you're coming from a good place and your intentions are good, I think that for the most part, those being impacted can understand in like day-to-day conversations. When you say something harmful because it's just a joke or you weren't thinking, that is never coming from a good place.
Sure.
And I think when we talk about intent and impact and stigmas and perception, like, I think we blur the line sometimes. And we try to like muddy the waters.
Yeah.
I always try to use like sayings that I don't really understand. Like we try, you know what I mean? Where we're like, well, I know I said insert awful thing, but like I was joking. Obviously I didn't mean to hurt anyone. That's very different than, asking me only about if things are pretty and never about business. Those are two different things. And one of them is just like in your face. And like you have to be a little smarter about it, or like you have to think more about it. And the other, and that's the one every one of us needs to like acknowledge to be true. And when you work through that, I think you get to just understanding that everything we do impacts people, and like we just need to be more considerate.
Yeah, I can understand that. So to that end, I mean, we talk a lot about the language that we use and the impact that we make on individuals with our speech. And we've spent a lot of time on what that impact might be on any particular individual in our own spaces and in a day-to-day conversation. But let's talk a little bit about what that means for us as event professionals and to our attendees and our audiences, and what our language and what our communications intentions can do to our audiences. Because I would think that if our one-on-one speech has impact and perception in that way that we've been talking about, that is probably only magnified when we get to a large group of people, such as our attendee bases and our audiences for our events. So what's your take on that? Where are we with trying to make our intentions the best we can in front of large groups of people?
I mean, one thing, and you and I spoke about this the other night in a candid conversation. Who's speaking at your conference? Because that is one of the biggest billboards of inclusion that or uninclusion that people do not realize. And so many people in our industry are yelling like, you need to diversify your panels. It can't be the same people talking. It can't be, oh, this one again. And that's so impactful. Second, if it's hybrid or virtual, who's doing your closed captions? Who's doing it? Because you need it. Because that is 110% impacting people. And although it's just not in your intention, that is impacting people.
Yeah.
Where is your event?
Yeah, we talked about that before. Yeah.
You know, food and beverage, like, do you have, here's a big one that really, like, I really want to press upon this coming from the food and beverage world. What's your signature zero proof drink?
Yeah, because not everybody enjoys a drink after work.
No. And also we need to like unnormalize like receptions being like, that's a whole, yeah. And also like there's a lot of people who have opted to not partake in alcohol. They've also, opted, or they just said like I won't drink at events. Or like for me, if I drive to your event, I will not have a single drink.
Yep.
I won't. It is a full fact at this point in my life. But no one wants to be that person walking around with a water. Because at an alcohol, at a reception, it was like, oh, you're not having drinks? And God forbid you're a woman not drinking, you're pregnant.
That has, yes.
It's wild to me. And I do it myself, which is even the worst. Like, again, we all make this. I would never ask a woman if she's pregnant. Like, don't, like.
Just don't do it.
Just don't. Never. You just don't do it. Especially don't go, oh, you're not drinking tonight. Is there like, don't do that. But you know what I mean? Like, that's really important to me. Like allergens, like, are you considering dairy options? I think I read a statistic where like 30% of the next generation don't eat meat in some form, whether flexitarian to vegan. Or do you have options for them to enjoy themselves? Like,
yeah,
making events, mass gatherings, as inclusive as possible is the best way to be intentful. Making as many people in the room feel seen and heard, whether it's because they walk in and they see a version of themselves on a stage, whether it's that they go out and they're like, oh my goodness, like we do at one of our venues, we do a giant marshmallow and like we reclut it and it's like a giant s'mores activation. That marshmallow is vegan and gluten-free, which if you don't know how marshmallow is made, don't Google it. But typically it is not a vegan item. But, we did it and we do it and people are like, oh my goodness, like you thought of me.
Right.
And that's like the other side of this is having people realize like that they are being considered, that they are being thought of, their presence is valid. And it's how, like, what are your whiteboard sessions or your planning sessions or your Blackboard session, your chalkboard session? When you're thinking about your event, how many people are you considering? And who at that table is making those considerations? Because the more that stakeholder table looks like the outside world, the more your event will.
And the better it will be perceived from that space as well.
Because it's not even about the perception, but it will be perceived well because it was done well.
Because it was done with intention. It was done with every good intention.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, Thomas, we're getting pretty close to time here, and I just want to give you a space to give us any last words of advice on this topic. I know that you are very passionate about it, and I'm sure there will be far more conversations between you and I and everybody else as well. But what if you could give us a summation piece of advice between the intention versus perception space, what would you have us take home with us?
Everyone's going to make mistakes. And if you're coming from the right place and you're being respectful, people will always understand. It might not be in the moment where someone is negatively impacted, but you will know in that scenario what to say. You'll know in your heart what to say. Saying, I'm sorry you felt this way is probably not how to start that conversation. Sure. And we've all learned it the hard way. We've all learned it the hard way. Or I have learned it the hard way. So please take that into advice. When you make a mistake, own it and be intentful in how you're responding to it. Because that's just as impactful. Use it as a learning moment and a teaching moment for yourself. And if you do have the mental capacity to unpack where it's coming from, do it. And listen to the voices of those who have been experiencing it. I can talk all day about, being LGBT plus in this event world. I cannot tell you about the experience of being a queer person of color or, someone who has abilities that aren't considered by event people.
Sure.
Those voices are there. Those voices are incredible because anyone telling their story is a resource. Google it. There's a million other people, go the duck one that no one can search it if you want to do it privately so no one knows that you're trying to better yourself.
DuckDuckGo, is that the one?
Yeah, that one.
Shout out to them.
Do not ask me about your tech at your events. I'm sorry. And realize that there's a lot of resources out there. Like there is, and talk to your friends. Honestly, talk to your friends. And that's my A. My B, which is anytime I have a platform, I'm going to always say this. Look at the people you've helped in your career. Look at them. Look at the doors that you've opened. They most likely all look the same. So when you have the opportunity to help a young event professional grow and foster and learn, hold that door open for someone who comes from a different world than you. You will be a better professional. You will be a better event professional. You will be a better person. You will learn so much about yourself, and you are giving opportunity and access to someone else. It's the best thing I can say. The way we change our industry for the better is by inviting new perspectives. And that can be one of the most intentional things you can do.
Well said. I can absolutely appreciate that. And it can only make us better as an industry if we all continue to do that. So, well, Thomas, I want to thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation with me. It's been fantastic to hear your thoughts on this. I know that there are a lot of people out there that have many questions similarly to me and similarly to this conversation. And I do want to acknowledge everybody out there that has been listening. Thank you so much for being with us today. And we will be doing, again, another office hours. Thomas will endeavor to join us for that one. Without unforeseen issues happening, we will plan to see him at our office hours. But this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for all of your insight. I know there will be many more conversations of this nature. For those of you watching, either now at the scheduled time or later, I know this is on all sorts of different platforms. So please make sure that you are liking and subscribing and paying attention to your notifications in your inboxes, because we will be coming at you for office hours and many more of these insightful conversations to come. Please engage with us, send questions, thoughts, anything like that to myself at Stephanie Jaco, CSEP on LinkedIn. or you can find me on Facebook or Instagram. Shoot me a message and we will continue this conversation. We want to engage with you just as much as you are here with us. So thank you again to everyone. Thank you, Thomas, and we will see you all next time.
Thank y'all.